I gave her everything, $400,000, a house, a life. And when she finally told me the truth, I realized I'd been building a dream on someone else's lies. I'm 68 years old. I thought I knew better. But love, or whatever I called it, made me blind. This is what happens when you confuse gratitude with affection, when you mistake dependency for devotion. I met Kassandra in a small café in Cebu on a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of afternoon where the heat makes everything slow down and you're grateful just to sit under a fan with something cold to drink. She was 24. I was 68. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. But when she smiled at me, really smiled, not the polite kind you give to strangers, something shifted inside me. Something I thought had died 12 years ago when my wife passed and my marriage dissolved into paperwork and silence. I'd been in the Philippines for 3 weeks by then. My kids barely called anymore. They had their own lives in Atlanta and Denver, their own families, their own problems. I wasn't part of that world. I was the man who sent birthday cards late and showed up to graduations with the wrong flowers. So I left Mississippi, sold the house, took my pension and my savings, and bought a one-way ticket to Manila. I told myself I was looking for peace. Maybe I was. Or maybe I was just running from the quiet. The cafe was nearly empty when she walked in. She had this way of moving, light and easy, like she wasn't carrying anything heavy. I was sitting by the window with a book I wasn't reading when she stopped at my table. "Excuse me," she said. Her English was soft but clear. "Is this seat taken?" I looked around. There were 6 empty tables. She could have sat anywhere, but she chose mine. "No," I said. "Please." She sat down across from me and ordered iced coffee in Tagalog. Then she turned to me and asked, "Are you here on vacation?" I told her I didn't know yet, that I was trying to figure that out. She laughed. Not loud, just enough to show she understood. "Me too," she said. "I'm always trying to figure that out." We talked for 3 hours. She told me her name was Kassandra, that she was from Tacloban, a city I'd heard about on the news years ago after a typhoon tore it apart. She told me about her family, her mother who cleaned houses, her 2 younger brothers still in school. She told me she'd wanted to be a nurse but couldn't afford the tuition. She'd come to Cebu looking for work, any work, but the city was expensive and the jobs were hard to find. "It's okay," she said, smiling again. "I'm lucky. I'm healthy. I'm young. Things will work out." I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to. I told her about my life too. About Susan, my late wife, and how we'd been married for 31 years before cancer took her. About my job as an insurance adjuster, a job I'd done for 40 years, sitting in offices and filling out forms and calculating risks that didn't matter to anyone but the company. About my kids who'd grown up and moved away and how I'd become a stranger in my own house. About the silence, the unbearable silence. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "Just for a second. You seem like a kind man," she said. "I think you deserve to be happy." No one had said that to me in years. Maybe ever. I felt something crack open inside my chest. When we left the cafe, the sun was setting and the streets were filling with noise. Motorcycles and vendors and families walking home. She asked if I wanted to see the rest of the city. I said yes. We walked for hours. She showed me her favorite places, the small church where she prayed on Sundays, the market where she bought mangoes, the beach where she went when she needed to think. We sat on the sand and watched the waves come in. She told me about the typhoon, how the water had risen so fast her family barely escaped, how they'd lost everything. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't asking for pity. She was just telling me the truth. I admired that. I admired her. "Why are you being so kind to me?" I asked. She looked at me and smiled. "Because you're kind to me," she said, "and because you look lonely. Like me." I wanted to deny it, to tell her I was fine, that I'd chosen this life, that I was here by choice, but I couldn't, because she was right. I was lonely, lonelier than I'd ever been, and for the first time in 12 years, I didn't want to be. Can I see you again? I asked. She nodded. I'd like that, she said. We exchanged numbers. She kissed my cheek before she left. Soft, quick, like a promise. That night, lying in my hotel room, I couldn't stop thinking about her. About the way she laughed, the way she listened, the way she made me feel like I mattered. I told myself to be careful, that this was dangerous, that I was too old for this, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt alive, and I wasn't ready to let that go. 4 months passed like 4 days. Kassandra moved into my rental in Mactan, a small 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the water. It wasn't much, but it was ours. She made it feel like home. She hung curtains, put flowers in vases, cooked meals that filled the place with smells I'd forgotten existed. Adobo, sinigang, pancit. She'd stand in the kitchen singing softly in Tagalog, while I sat on the balcony watching the sun drop into the ocean. I'd never been happier. Every morning she'd wake me up with coffee and a kiss on the forehead. "Good morning, Marvin," she'd say, smiling like she meant it. "Did you sleep well?" I always said yes, even on the nights when my back ached or my mind wouldn't shut off, because when she asked, it felt like she cared, and that was enough. We spent our mornings at the beach. She loved the water. She'd swim out far, farther than I ever could, and I'd watch her from the shore, terrified she'd get caught in a current but too proud to tell her to come back. She always did. She'd run up to me dripping and laughing, shaking her hair like a dog. "You worry too much," she'd say. "I'm fine. I'm always fine." In the evenings, we'd sit on the balcony and talk. She told me more about her family. Her mother, Lita, who worked 6 days a week cleaning vacation rentals for tourists. Her brothers, Miguel and Carlo, 16 and 14, who wanted to go to college but didn't know how they'd afford it. She talked about them with so much love, it hurt to listen. "I want to help them," she'd say. "I want to give them a better life, but I don't know how." I told her we'd figure it out together, and I meant it. She introduced me to her family over video calls. Her mother was shy, soft-spoken, but her eyes lit up when Kassandra told her about me. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter," she said in broken English. "She is a good girl. She works hard." I told her I knew, that Kassandra was wonderful, that I was lucky to have her. Miguel and Carlo waved at the camera and asked me about America, what it was like, if I'd ever been to New York, if I knew any famous people. I told them stories that made them laugh. Kassandra watched me the whole time, smiling in a way that made my chest tight. One night, about 3 months in, we were lying in bed when she rolled over and looked at me. "Marvin," she said, "can I ask you something?" I said yes. "Do you think you could ever love someone like me?" The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I'd been too afraid to say it out loud. "I already do," I said. She didn't say anything. She just kissed me, slow, soft, like she was afraid I'd disappear. "I love you too," she whispered, and I believed her. God help me, I believed her. A week later, I asked her to marry me. We were sitting on the balcony watching the sunset. I didn't have a ring. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I didn't want to lose her. "Kassandra," I said, "I know I'm not young. I know I'm not rich. But I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" She stared at me for a long time. Then she started crying. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, Marvin, I'll marry you." She threw her arms around my neck and held me so tight I could barely breathe. "You're the kindest man I've ever known," she said. "I promise I'll make you happy." I started thinking about the future, really thinking, not just days or weeks, but years. I wanted to build something with her, something permanent, a home, a business, a legacy. My kids didn't need my money. They'd told me that more times than I could count. They had good jobs, nice houses, retirement funds. They were fine, but Kassandra's family wasn't. They needed help, and I had the means to give it. So I started looking at properties, small resorts, guest houses, something we could run together, something that would give her family security. I spent hours online researching, comparing prices, making plans. Kassandra would sit next to me, her head on my shoulder, and say, "You don't have to do this, Marvin. I'm happy just being with you." But I wanted to. I needed to. Because for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. It was Kassandra who brought up the land. We were having breakfast one morning when she said, "Marvin, I need to tell you something. My uncle, my mother's brother, he owns land in Bohol. Beachfront. Beautiful. He's been trying to sell it for years, but he can't find a buyer." She pulled out her phone and showed me photos. White sand, clear water, palm trees bending in the wind. It looked like paradise. "He wants to sell it cheap," she said. "Because of family debt. He needs money fast." I was thinking maybe we could buy it, build something there, a small resort or a guest house, something we could run together. I stared at the photos. The idea made sense. Bohol was a tourist destination. The property was stunning, and if her uncle was willing to sell below market value, it could be a good investment. More than that, it could be ours. A place we built from the ground up, a legacy. "How much?" I asked. She hesitated. "He's asking $150,000 for everything, the land, the permits, everything." I didn't flinch. I had the money. My pension, my savings, the sale of my house back in Mississippi. I'd come to the Philippines with nearly $600,000. I could afford it. "Let me think about it," I said. She nodded and kissed my cheek. "Of course. No pressure." But I didn't need to think. That night, lying in bed, I made the decision. I wanted this. Not just for me. For her. For us. The next morning, I told her I was in. She cried again. "Thank you, Marvin," she said. "Thank you. This is going to change everything. For my family. For us." A week later, I wired $150,000 to an account she gave me. She said it was her uncle's, that he'd transfer the title once the money cleared. I didn't ask questions. She was my wife. Why would I? A month later, she came to me with another request. "Marvin," she said, "the contractors are ready to start building, but they need money up front for materials, labor, permits. It's how things work here." She showed me estimates, receipts, documents written in Tagalog that I couldn't read. The total was $100,000. I hesitated this time. Not because I didn't trust her, but because $250,000 was a lot of money. "Are you sure this is necessary?" I asked. She nodded. "I promise, Marvin. This is real. My uncle is helping. The contractors are professionals. Everything is legal. I wouldn't lie to you." I looked at her face. Her eyes. I wanted to believe her. So I did. I wired another $100,000. For a while, everything seemed fine. Kassandra was busy. She'd leave early in the morning and come back late at night. "I'm meeting with the contractors," she'd say, "talking to the engineers, handling the permits. It's a lot of work, but it's moving forward." I asked to see progress photos. She showed me a few. Foundation work, concrete, rebar. It looked legitimate, but something felt off. When I asked for receipts, she'd get defensive. "Why do you need receipts?" she'd say. "Don't you trust me?" I told her I did, but the doubt was creeping in. Her phone was always face down now. When it buzzed, she'd grab it quickly and walk into the other room. "Who was that?" I'd ask when she came back. "Just my uncle," she'd say, or "just the contractor," but her tone had changed, sharper, colder. When I asked about the project, she'd give vague answers. "It's going well, don't worry." But I was worrying, because $250,000 was gone, and I had nothing to show for it but a few photos and a promise. One night, I tried to talk to her about it. "Kassandra," I said, "I just want to understand what's happening, where the money's going, when we can visit the property." She exploded. "Why are you interrogating me?" she shouted. "I'm doing everything I can. Do you think this is easy? Do you think I'm not stressed? I backed off, apologized, told her I was just anxious, that I trusted her. But I didn't, not anymore, and I think she knew it. 6 months into construction, I told Kassandra I wanted to visit the property. I needed to see it with my own eyes. She made excuses. The roads are bad right now, she said. It's rainy season. It's not safe, I insisted. Kassandra, I've given you $250,000. I need to see what we're building. She went quiet. Then she nodded. Okay, we'll go this weekend. I didn't like the look on her face. It wasn't excitement. It was fear. We left early Saturday morning. The drive to Bohol took 4 hours. Kassandra barely spoke the whole way. She stared out the window, her jaw tight, her hands clenched in her lap. I tried to make conversation. Are you excited? I asked. To show me what we've built? She forced a smile. Yes, of course. But her voice was flat. When we finally arrived, my stomach dropped. There was a foundation, concrete, rebar, nothing else, no walls, no roof, no progress, just a slab of concrete in the middle of an empty field. I got out of the car and walked around. The property was real. The beach was there, but the construction was nowhere near what $250,000 should have bought. I turned to Kassandra. She was standing by the car, arms crossed, staring at the ground. Where's the rest? I asked. My voice was calm, too calm. She didn't answer. Kassandra, I said, where's the rest of the building? She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Guilt. The costs went up, she said quickly. Materials are more expensive than we thought. The permits took longer. The contractors needed more money up front. I shook my head. That doesn't explain this. Even in the Philippines, $250,000 should have built more than a concrete slab. She started crying. I'm doing my best, Marvin. I swear. I'm not trying to cheat you. Things just got complicated. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. Not anymore. That night, we stayed in a hotel in Tagbilaran. I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out where the money went. Kassandra slept next to me, or at least pretended to. In the morning, I confronted her again. I need to see the receipts. I said, all of them. The bank transfers, the contractor agreements, everything. She sat up, her face hard. Why are you doing this? She said. Why don't you trust me? Because I've given you everything, I said, and I have nothing to show for it. She started crying again. You're insulting me, she said. You're insulting my family. We've been working so hard, and you're treating me like a criminal. I felt the guilt hit me like a wave. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was projecting my ex-wife's betrayals onto her. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean it like that. She wiped her eyes and nodded. It's okay. I understand. You're just worried. But I promise, Marvin, everything is fine. But it wasn't fine. I knew it, and I think she knew I knew it. On the drive back to Cebu, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. The tears, the defensiveness, the guilt. Something had broken between us, and I didn't know how to fix it, or if I even wanted to. I couldn't let it go. 2 weeks after we got back from Bohol, I hired a lawyer. His name was Tomas. He was in his 50s, spoke perfect English, and had an office in a building near the port. I told him everything, the land, the money, the lack of progress. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, I'll look into it. Give me 2 weeks. I gave him copies of every document Kassandra had given me. Bank transfers, photos, text messages, everything. 2 weeks later, Tomas called me. Marvin, he said, we need to meet in person. I went to his office that afternoon. He had a folder on his desk, thick, full of papers. He opened it and slid a document across the table. "The land is real," he said, "but it's not owned by Cassandra's uncle." I stared at the document. "What do you mean?" He pointed to a name. "It's owned by a man named Roberto Cruz. Does that name mean anything to you?" I shook my head. "No. Who is he?" Tomas pulled out another document. A photo. "He's her ex-boyfriend. They were together for 3 years before you met her." My stomach turned. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I'm sure. And there's more. The permits you paid for? They're fake. The contractors? They don't exist. Most of the money you sent was transferred to 3 accounts. Hers, his, and 2 others I haven't been able to trace yet." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "How much?" I asked. He looked at the papers. "At least $350,000, maybe more." I drove home in a daze. I didn't know what I was going to say, what I was going to do. When I walked into the apartment, Kassandra was sitting on the couch. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, you're home early." I didn't smile back. "We need to talk." Her face changed. The smile disappeared. "What's wrong?" I sat down across from her. "I know about Roberto." She froze. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out the documents Tomas had given me and dropped them on the table. "I know the land is his. I know the permits are fake. I know where the money went." She stared at the papers. For a long time, she didn't say anything. Then she started crying. Not the soft, delicate tears she'd cried before. Real tears. Ugly tears. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry, Marvin. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." I felt numb. Didn't mean for what to happen? She looked at me, her face red and swollen. "Roberto and we were together before I met you. When we broke up, he still had access to my accounts. He found out about the money. He pressured me. He said he'd tell you everything if I didn't help him." "So you helped him steal from me?" I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. She shook her head. "It wasn't like that. I was going to pay you back. I swear. My family really did need money. The hospital bills for my mother were real. The school fees for my brothers were real. I was just trying to help everyone." I leaned back in the chair. "Did you ever love me?" She looked at me, her eyes wide. "Yes," she said. "I do love you, Marvin. I swear I do." But I didn't believe her. Not anymore. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't build dreams on stolen money. "I want you to leave," I said. She stared at me. "What?" I repeated myself. "I want you to leave. Tonight." She started crying harder. "Please, Marvin, don't do this. I'll fix it. I'll get the money back. I'll make it right." I shook my head. "You can't fix this. It's over." She sat there for a few more minutes, crying into her hands. Then she stood up, walked into the bedroom, and packed a bag. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out the door. I sat on the couch for hours after she left, staring at the papers, at the photos, at the life I'd built that had turned out to be a lie. I thought about calling my kids, but what would I say? That they'd been right? That I'd been a fool? I couldn't do it. So I just sat there, alone, in the silence. The weeks after Kassandra left were the longest of my life. I stayed in the Philippines. I didn't know where else to go. I couldn't face my kids. My daughter, Emily, had warned me. "Dad, you don't know this woman. You're moving too fast." My son, Jacob, had been more blunt. "Dad, she's 24. You're almost 70. What do you think this is?" I'd told them both to mind their own business, that I knew what I was doing, that Kassandra was different. Now I couldn't bear to hear them say they'd been right. I couldn't face my friends back in Mississippi either. Bob, my old colleague from the insurance company, had asked me before I left, "Are you sure about this, Marv? The Philippines? At your age?" I'd laughed it off, told him I was finally living. Now I realized I'd been dying, slowly, painfully, and I'd paid $400,000 for the privilege. I spent my days walking the beaches alone, the same beaches where Kassandra and I had walked together, where she'd laughed and held my hand and made me believe I was more than just an old man with money. I replayed every conversation, every red flag, the way she'd deflected when I asked about receipts, the way her phone was always face down, the way she'd cried when I questioned her. I'd seen it all, and I'd ignored it, because I wanted to believe, because I needed to believe. I'd given her $400,000, not just for the land. There were hospital bills for her mother. $50,000, she'd said. Her mother needed surgery. I never asked what kind. I just sent the money. School fees for her brothers, $20,000. They wanted to go to a private school, have a better future. How could I say no? A car, $30,000. She said we needed reliable transportation, that the buses weren't safe. I'd agreed, sent the money, never saw the car, all of it gone, scattered across accounts I'd never see, spent on things I'd never know about. Maybe her family really did need help, or maybe that was a lie too. I'd never know. I wasn't angry at her anymore. That surprised me. I thought I'd be furious, that I'd want revenge, justice. But I wasn't. I was angry at myself for being so desperate to feel loved that I'd ignored every warning, for confusing her gratitude with affection, for believing that money could buy connection, for thinking that a 24-year-old woman could actually love a 68-year-old man she'd known for 4 months. What had I been thinking? Tomas, the lawyer, called me a few times. Marvin, we can pursue this, file charges, get some of the money back. But I told him no. What's the point? I said, the money's gone. Even if I win, I'll spend years in court. And for what? To get back 10%? 20%? It's not worth it. He tried to argue. But I'd made up my mind. I didn't want to fight anymore. I just wanted to forget. One afternoon, I was sitting on the balcony when I realized something. I'd lost $400,000. But that wasn't what hurt the most. I'd lost something bigger. The belief that I could start over. That I could escape my past and build something new. That I could be loved for who I was, not what I had. That was the real loss. And no lawyer, no court, no amount of money could give that back to me. 3 months after Kassandra left, I woke up to a message from her. It was early morning. The sun was just starting to rise over the water. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Her name. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Marvin, the message read, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand, but I need to tell you something. I'm sorry. I think about you every day, about what I did, about how I hurt you. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could have been the person you thought I was. I know you won't believe me, but I did love you, in my own way. I just didn't know how to love you the right way. I hope you're okay. I hope you've found peace. You deserve it. You always did. I read the message 3 times. Then I put the phone down and stared out at the water. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just wanted me to know she regretted it. Part of me wanted to respond, to tell her I forgave her, or to tell her I hated her. But I didn't. I couldn't, because what could I say? That I forgave her? I didn't. That I hated her? I didn't. She was 24 years old, trying to survive in a country where survival meant doing things you weren't proud of. And I was 68, trying to escape loneliness by buying connection. We were both guilty, just in different ways. I thought about her words. I did love you, in my own way. Maybe she did. Maybe she loved the security I provided, the escape from poverty, the hope of a better life. Maybe that was her version of love. And maybe I loved her for similar reasons, because she made me feel young, wanted, important. Maybe neither of us loved each other the way we should have. Maybe we just needed each other, and when the need was gone, so was the love. I stared at the message for a week. I didn't respond. I didn't block her. I just let it sit there, unanswered. Every morning, I'd look at it, read it again, try to figure out what I felt. But I didn't feel anything. Not anger. Not sadness. Just emptiness. Like a part of me had been hollowed out and nothing could fill it back up. A week later, I deleted the message. Not out of anger. Not out of bitterness. Just out of acceptance. It was over. The relationship, the dream, the hope, all of it. And no words, hers or mine, could change what had happened. No apology could give me back the $400,000. No explanation could give me back the belief that I could trust someone again. It was over, and I needed to accept that. That night, I sat on the balcony and watched the sun set. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep purple. The waves rolled in steady and constant. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not joy, but peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop fighting, when you finally let go. I'm still in the Philippines. That surprises people when I tell them. They ask why I stayed after everything that happened, why I didn't go back to Mississippi, back to my kids, back to the life I left behind. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe because going back would feel like admitting defeat, or maybe because, despite everything, I like it here. The warmth, the ocean, the simplicity. So I stayed, but I moved. Left Cebu, left Mactan, left all the places that reminded me of her. I live in a small town on Palawan now, Puerto Princesa. It's quiet here. Not a lot of tourists, not a lot of noise. Just a small house by the water and enough savings to get by. I don't have grand plans anymore. No investments. No business ventures. No dreams of building something permanent. I just live. Day by day. One foot in front of the other. I see couples on the beach sometimes. Older men with younger women. Holding hands. Laughing. Planning their futures. I don't judge them anymore. I used to. Before all this happened. I'd see them and think, what fools. Don't they know what they're doing? But now I understand. I understand the loneliness that drives them. The hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will see past your age and your money and love you for who you are. I understand why they ignore the red flags, why they believe the promises, because the alternative, the loneliness, is worse than the risk. But I also know the truth now. Love isn't something you can buy. Connection isn't something you can force. And trust, real trust, takes more than 4 months and a shared dream. It takes years. It takes honesty. It takes vulnerability from both sides, not just one. And it takes more than money. It takes respect, equality, a willingness to see each other as whole people, not just as solutions to problems. I don't regret coming here. I don't regret trying. I don't even regret Kassandra, not really, because she taught me something I needed to learn, that I can't run from loneliness, that I can't buy my way out of pain, that I can't replace what I lost with something new and shiny and exciting. I have to face it, sit with it, understand it, and maybe, just maybe, accept it. I do regret how blind I let myself become. How much I needed to believe in something, in her, that I ignored every sign that it wasn't real. I regret the $400,000, not because of the money itself, but because of what it represents. A life's work, 40 years of sitting in offices and filling out forms and calculating risks, gone. Just like that. Transferred to accounts I'll never see, spent on things I'll never know about. That's what hurts, not the loss, but the waste. My kids call me sometimes now. Emily called last month, asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine, that I was living simply, that I'd learned some things. She asked if I regretted it. I told her the truth. Yes and no, I said. I regret the money. I regret being foolish, but I don't regret trying. I'd rather have tried and lost than never tried at all. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm proud of you, Dad, for being honest, for not giving up. I didn't tell her that I had given up, just not in the way she thought. I'm 68 years old. I lost $400,000. I lost my pride. I lost my belief in second chances. But I gained something too. Clarity. The kind that only comes from falling hard and getting back up. The kind that strips away all the illusions and leaves you with nothing but the truth. And the truth is this: I don't need someone else to be happy. I don't need love or connection or companionship to feel whole. I just need to be okay with who I am. Alone, imperfect, human. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone again. Probably not. The walls are up now, higher and thicker than before, and I don't have the energy to tear them down. Not at my age. Not after this. But that's okay, because I've learned something else too. I don't need to. I don't need to trust someone to be happy. I don't need to open my heart to find peace. I just need to be enough on my own. And after 68 years, I finally am. Some nights, I sit on my porch and watch the stars. The sky here is clearer than it ever was in Mississippi. You can see every constellation, every distant light. It reminds me how small I am. How small all of this is. The money, the betrayal, the heartbreak. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. Not really. What matters is that I'm still here, still breathing, still moving forward. And maybe that's enough. I think about Kassandra sometimes, wonder where she is, if she's okay, if she's with Roberto, if she ever thinks about me, but I don't let myself wonder too long. Because it doesn't matter. She's gone. That life is gone. And I'm here, building something new. Not a resort, not a business, not a dream, just a life. A quiet, simple life. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough.